The war in the Ukraine, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, is not about energy. It's about a lot of other things. It's about the Russian president's desire to re-establish the borders of the Soviet Union. It's about Putin's view of Russia's history, of its long-term empire, of Putin's view of the Ukraine as not being a nation state. But nevertheless, energy is important in this conflict. Energy is important for three reasons, really. One, in many respects, Russia is a petrostate. That means that a large amount of its income is based on energy. About 40% of the budget comes from oil and gas. The second is that in Russian-Ukrainian relations, energy has really been an instrument from the Russian side. They can threaten to cut off energy. They've been selling cheap gas to the Ukraine. But thirdly, and most importantly, energy is important in this conflict because if we get a cut-off of energy, either through European sanctions or a cut-off from the Russian side, it's going to have a big impact on both Russia and the European Union. So the question here and now is how vulnerable is Russia and how vulnerable is the European Union to an interruption in energy supplies? For Russia, I think the answer is it's vulnerable in the medium to long term, not so much in the short term. With very high oil prices going over $100 a barrel, Russia's income this year will probably be enough to keep the government afloat, even in the event of a gas cutoff. The Russian problem is that the about 150 billion cubic meters of gas it sells to the EU cannot be replaced by another customer. China takes about 10 BCM from the east, 10 BCM from the west. The east and west is totally disconnected. There's no pipeline connecting these two parts of Russia. It can increase either part to about 30, 40 BCM over the next 3 or 4 years. But within a decade, there's almost no chance of China buying more than about half of what the European Union buys at the moment. So Russia's problem is it's not going to find another customer for the gas it sells to Russia. This is going to lead to a decrease in income, and it will make Russia more dependent on China. If we look at the EU perspective, the answer is a little bit different. The EU will suffer, I think, more in the short term than in the long term, but its suffering will be primarily through higher gas prices. This will hit consumers, this will hit industry, and it may, of course, lead to political protests that might be a problem for European governments seeking re-election. The reason I say this is that the 150 BCM that go to Europe can be replaced. In the short term, we can't get a lot more from Norway, but we can use storage, which we have, to get us through March and April. And once we get there, we start looking at buying more gas at the LNG market. This is liquefied natural gas that is imported by boat. Traditionally, Europe uses about half its capacity. It uses about 100 out of 200 BCM. Now remember, we need to get the 150 Russian BCM back. About 2/3 of that can come through LNG. So in the longer term, we can expand LNG capacity even more. We can expand capacity from North Africa, possibly even from Norway, to cover this gap. So the EU's vulnerability is not in terms of people freezing to death. It is in terms of higher bills for consumers, higher bills for industry, more need for investment, and probably speeding up the transition to renewables a little bit more. So the long and the short of this is, if you balance this off, Russia looks far more vulnerable to a cutoff than the European Union does. And the possible consequence of a gas cutoff, if you look 5 or 10 years down the line, is a Russia that becomes China's little brother geopolitically and becomes totally dependent on China when it comes to income from oil and gas sales.